Hello and welcome to Beyond Top 10 Tennis. My name is Dr. Ashley Morgan Berge and I'm your host. I'm the author of 11 books, a CEO of 12 years, the founder of a startup set on data privacy, most importantly an elite performance coach of over 18 years, having worked with athletes throughout Europe, the United States to Australia. And of course, most excitingly, I am the world's leading scientist on coach and athlete performance, specifically when it comes to developing a top 10 tennis ranking. My work includes everything from mitigating injuries to conditioning behaviors that set a player up long term for the long game towards a top 10 tennis ranking. I'm behind theories from the optimal performance theory, optimal behavior for optimal performance, the barrier breaker, the rule of transference to the golden rule. As has become custom, each episode we dive into one of my books to share additional insights and dig a little bit deeper. We've been focusing on the secrets to optimal performance success, a comprehensive discussion on developing elite coaches and players. With over 40 episodes down to date, today's topic plays its own role, like so many other episodes, in developing the player, parent to coach for that road ahead towards a top 10 tennis ranking. So as always, buckle in and enjoy the ride. Thank you so much for joining us today. I'm a bit perplexed in a way about today's episode because it's the final one of this chapter and of the book, The Secrets to Optimal Performance Success. And if you've been following along from the very beginning, thank you so much. But oh my goodness, how far we've come. So I think you understand, hopefully, that perplexion. So, and if you're just new, I'm sure you will see why, especially if you track back to some of our previous episodes. Today's episode is on learning from mistakes, coaches. And we actually have had an episode on this, but for players, not just the coaches. So it's going to be a little bit different, hopefully interesting / intriguing in the best possible ways. But I think it's important to share from the very beginning that humanized approach that we take each and every episode. And when we're looking at mistakes and learning, essentially when we're focusing on the coach, we're focusing on that adult. So not the child and or that player or athlete in this respect. So it's transferable how it crosses over to the parents out there, just the adults in the room in general. And I think we have so many topics now. This is episode 45, and we've established quite an extensive catalogue of different metrics, whether they are behavioral or performance specific. But when we're really considering that pathway towards that top 10 tennis ranking, all those interchanging pieces or parts, if you like. And from the very beginning, when we're looking at that triangular approach, that includes the parent, the coach, and the player or athlete. And it's so important to see how far we've come from that perspective, especially when we're looking to encapsulate learning and the mistakes that happen along the way. I think I can be the first to put my hand up to say mistakes happen. Of course, by all means, I have made mistakes. And I mean, first and foremost is obviously my background as that athlete and succumbing to injury after injury. And I can also say I was guilty of not practicing what I preach when my coaching status continued to rise and ascend. And for those of you who are familiar with my running background, I did not do the same. I was too busy, I think, having fun running. Yes, those of you who are runners, I understand. Those of you who are not, it's a little bit ironic. But we learn as we evolve, as we grow, as we get older, some obviously more than others, but it really is dependent on what your core focus is on. And if you have that desire, that ambition to improve, then you will learn and mistakes will be made. And you're going to have really micro instances. And that's obviously, we transfer that over into that player athlete when we're looking at those micro inferences in those their performance, those specific metrics on such a minuscule scale that makes such a significant difference. And we can look at this from our behavioral standpoint, that there's going to be quite very small changes we can make, whether that's reflective feedback, if that is something we practice on a weekly basis, if not a daily basis, and or after each and every session, and giving ourselves that opportunity to improve. Because at the end of the day, if we're looking at an error or a mistake, how can we address that sooner rather than later? Or how can we catch ourselves out? Because someone's obviously not behind us or next to us all the time to say, I think you could have just made a mistake. The acknowledgement of potential errors and or mistakes happens when we take that time, ideally, opposed to being pulled up on it or seeing the negative influence or effect from that, whether, and I think this is a bit of a dangerous territory, so to speak, when we're looking at the coach and the athlete, because if your coaching practices are attributing towards that player developing an injury, and I have used this previously, we're looking at coaching negligence, which is a really scary / concerning discussion to be around and or involved in. And at the end of the day, the coaches are the adults responsible for developing that athlete and safeguarding them and protecting them as well, which I think those discussions are unfortunately more often than not ignored. But it's so important to remember the role of the coach is incredibly multifaceted when we're looking at what constitutes a really good coach, a great coach, or some of the best coaches in the world. And I think it's really important to reframe that. The best coaches, of course, yes, can be responsible for developing top 10 tennis players, but they're also responsible for building the foundations at a very early age. So my hat goes off to the, not wearing one though, to the coaches out there that put in the work from the very beginning, that they understand that developmental spectrum with that athlete who's 9, 10, 11 years old, and they follow the pathway, they follow the long game over the course of that initial 10 years of play. So they are immersed in, they are a part of that developmental spectrum. And then that next 10 years of play, that is incredibly rewarding. And we have a number of coaches, only a number, on the WTA and ATP tours who have done that. But that's only one side. You have those niches. So I think it's really important not to discard the developmental, because obviously the developmental coaches are not at the helm of the game, but they serve an incredibly important purpose. They allow that player athlete the skills to get to the point where they can take that next step, move to the next level. And a high performance coach who is not equipped in that area, they do not have those skills. They have that next level skills, but they are reliant on that. But if you can harness both to go throughout that first 10 years and transition to the next, that is where I Am Your Tennis Coach and Guru comes in, with all of the tools in there to apply over a set period of time. Now, before we get too distracted on that, because this is a lot, we really want to bring it back to mistakes and learning from them and what can happen. And if we rewind just slightly about coaching practices and that area of negligence, that's why it's so important, it's so absolutely fundamental for coaches to be mindful of upskilling. Because unfortunately, current coaching practices and coach education at this moment in time does not include the science, that materials, those resources, educational, that's performance based in the sporting spectrum, and specifically in tennis. So the work that has been uncovered and available through AMA International, and we're up to 10 complete texts to date, that has been unraveling what it really takes to get to the elite whilst mitigating injuries. So voiding a coach being susceptible to negligence. And again, I acknowledge the scary, the subject and the word of caution here, because it's paramount for coaches to upskill to make sure they're in this position. And obviously, if coach education providers are not giving coaches the tools and or the resources, or they do not, that their choice, you do have a choice as coaches, and also for the parents out there, to upskill yourself. And that's where I think our texts come in. And this has been touched on previously in a couple of episodes, that the decision was made by myself to form AMA International to ensure coaches just like you, or players out there just like you, and for the parents and or guardians, that you have access, that this body of work was not closed off or limited to a federation. For example, that it was incredibly important from someone who had that background, who suffered through that negligence of all those injuries, and there's a lot to list there, and it's incredibly unfortunate. But what can I do to make sure you don't make those same mistakes? For the players, athletes, don't make the same mistakes of staying with a coach who is not equipped with the tools to safeguard your body for longevity, to safeguard your performance so you can get through that initial 10 years of play and be healthy and reach that next peak performance in that second 10 years of play, and continue that peak performance cycle, which we've touched on in most recent episodes. And to learn from, if there is an error in judgment, if a mistake has been made, you are not going to be conscious of that unless you're putting the work in on a regular basis of upskilling, but diversifying where you are upskilling. So if you are relying on that singular coach education provider, for example, who does not have access to the latest scientific research and resources, you are going to be incredibly limited. Because tennis specifically, well, sport in general as well, is global, which means whatever a federation is uncovering does not necessarily mean that's just it. There are scientists, of course, all around the world, and there are thousands of us working towards peak performance cycles, and so many varying facets of just academia in general that can potentially have those crossovers. Now, the best way to obviously access that is to find those hubs, if you like, to tap into. And AMA International is one of them. And I'm really running this home because mistakes happen, but more often than not, coaches are not aware that it is actually a mistake at all, because their toolkit, what they know and what they have learned, that is attributed towards upskilling, teaching a child, a player, an athlete how to learn the game of tennis, how you should teach certain strokes of tennis through however they have been taught what works for them. And you need to ask yourself, well, but what if something's broken? What if what has worked in the past is now broken? What if it needs to be modified to accommodate the growing body and the changes that do happen? And this is a really big topic and a really big discussion, because we know adolescents change, their bodies change. And again, we've had episodes on this, whether it's looking at, the discrete skills to the serial skills, but more often than not, those modifications are not made. And these athletes that really were thriving in their sport, and if we focus on tennis, all of a sudden can no longer play because it's injury after injury after injury. Simple ones can be just varying growth spurts, and the accommodations are not being made for that taller athlete and that ball height and all their tools that they're using, so their racket, the pressure in the balls that they're starting on, if they need to regress before they progress again. And it's like very small little steps that you can take from that perspective that can make a world of difference to that athlete learning how to move on court again when they are a lot taller than they were 3-4 months ago. And this happens a lot when kids are on holidays at the end of year, and they have that 1 to 2 months off potentially, and then all of a sudden it's funny, not funny, because it's obviously a part of life, and all of us have either been there or are going through it, so we know how normal and natural that is. But what's not normal and what is not natural is doing the same thing for that same player who has now changed, who has now grown taller, or they could have grown a little bit quicker, or they're learning how to work with their new body, so they could have gotten a little bit bigger even, and so they're learning how to move with a heavier frame. And there is absolutely nothing unhealthy with that, and that's so important to share, because I guess it works in two ways. You can go upwards, taller, or outwards, and a lot of that does end up turning into muscle in a good way as that athlete progresses with their performance, which can be incredibly rewarding. There's obviously a very different discussion there if there are unhealthy habits that underpin that. So we really want to focus on these changes that can happen, and that the athlete really just needs to relearn to an extent different parts of their game again to accommodate these changes. But if nothing is being done, no changes are being done, you are leaving the athlete susceptible to developing an injury, but also susceptible to losing that interest, because all of a sudden they were playing at quite a reasonable level, and then their hand-eye coordination is just off because all of a sudden their arms are a little bit longer, so their timing of the ball is off. Or their knees have been a little bit sore because of the growth, so that they're really struggling to flex at this moment in time. So different modifications need to be made, and strength obviously plays a role in that. Body weight underscore at this level, or within this age group specifically, so you really want to be cautious in that respect. Though modifications and making sure they are apparent and that you as a coach are being mindful of that, is one way of ensuring that these mistakes are not happening too frequently. Obviously, mistakes are actually a very good thing within a certain, I think, context, because it really allows you to question what you're doing and how you can do better. And they are really good reminders of how we can grow and progress. And it's incredibly important to be mindful of this. And again, all of this it crosses over with that humanized approach. Just as in making mistakes on court or with a player athlete, it's the same as in life, whether it's from one individual to the next, in different relationship dynamics. So you can go the coach-athlete relationship, and it's the same with the parent and the child, and or the friend and the other friend, or partner and significant other. So there are so many variations there, and it's a decisional balance that I've touched on in the secrets to optimal performance success, but also most recently the 7 keys to optimize your life. We touch on what a decisional balance is and how human behavior underpins that, and how we can utilize that to reach that next peak performance, but use human behavior as such to really rewire that decision-making process so it serves us and to whichever that objective may be. And in this context, we can say, okay, that objective is to improve my player's performance, to improve my performance so I'm equipped with the tools to get them there. And our initial goal may be, if you're at that developmental age range, to achieve a national ranking or to get a state ranking, and or to secure or work towards an initial challenger and or ITF event, and you make sure it's incremental. And if your goal, your primary endpoint is a top 10 tennis ranking, you work back on how you're going to get there. And again, I'm Your Tennis Coaching Guru obviously underscores that 20 years of play with those programs set out to allow that to happen. But the What Is Your Game Missing series shares how you need to implement the 7 keys as such inadvertently to allow that happen. So they're all interconnected, and I'm sharing, I think, a lot of this is because we know, and I also know from that player's standpoint and coaches as well, the mistakes that can be made, and a lot of them unfortunately are universal. So we have these tools, these resources now that reframe the necessary education that we need in the sports sciences, specifically even when we're looking at the behavioral side to the biomechanics and how they're interwoven, so they're connected to allow that result to happen. And I'm getting a bit sciencey here, and I'm trying to hold back because I have spent a big part of the past week working towards that latest publication that I've been sharing or touching on in a couple of episodes, and it really unwraps. I'm really looking forward to when it comes out. No promises of when, and again, review some of our previous episodes for the why behind that. But I get a bit excited in this respect, especially when I'm writing about it on a daily basis, and I get to talk with you. And this is a first, because this is the Beyond Top 10 Tennis was launched this year, and I've already, as you know, got 11 books behind me. So this is the very first time I'm actually writing one, so my 12th one, and also conversing at the same time. So there is a bit of a crossover, and part of me is trying to hold back of not oversharing but then the other half really wants to let you know some of these new secrets that are being unraveled. And obviously they are backed by science. That's our underlying premise and promise, to make sure that science remains a constant, because I think there are one too many coaches out there, or parents of players that have those opinions that are unsubstantiated, so they do not have the data behind them. And everyone knows that most people really enjoy having an opinion, but when we're looking at such a scary topic, for example, as negligence, we want to make sure we have the tools to equip coaches in the best possible way to ensure they know they are doing the absolute right thing by their players and athletes, and they are not intentionally causing harm. And the intentional could be, well, I'm using older practices that have worked in the past. Is there a risk of that player developing an injury? Yes, but you know what? This is what I'm just comfortable with doing. And that's a no. It's okay, we now know that these certain practices can lead to these negative long-term effects, can derail a player's career, can cause a significant career-ending injury. So these are the practices now. These are the technical modifications we need to make to accommodate that player athlete, to ensure they can have a healthy career, to ensure they have a chance of making that initial 10 years of play, and they can be empowered to make that decision if they want to turn professional. And for whatever reason, if they do or they don't, it's because of their performance and or decision. It's not because of negligence and or corresponding factors, which is incredibly important, and it's empowering in and of itself as well. It's how sport should be, not for those of you out there, and it's not everyone, but there is a quite significant number of players who are derailed because of these injuries, and more often than not, it's because they did exactly what their coach told them to do. They did not deviate from the plan. They did exactly what they were told to do, and maybe even then some. And this is what we're talking about. It's learning from these mistakes as coaches to make sure you are mindful of what your player, what your athlete is doing, what their practice entails, and what they're working towards, and to be educated, skilled with a level of expertise that knows, okay, we're going to modify that, we're going to rein that in, we need to tweak this technical inference right here, even if it's on that minuscule scale, to prevent you from developing an injury. Really simple examples I've given in the past is developing tennis elbow, and this can really happen quite quickly and commonly when that impact obviously is behind the body or at a certain height, and too much stress is placed on that elbow. And I cannot tell you, or I can probably guarantee, any club, especially developmental, I visit will have athletes then and there susceptible to negligence in this way, because they are being allowed to contact the ball in this way, and most importantly, the coach is not saying anything. They are not changing it. Maybe a few weeks later, or maybe when it comes to a one-on-one session, but when it's happening, and obviously after that 100, 200, 300 balls have been hit in that way, you know that soreness it's getting there. It's getting to the point where they're going to need time off to recover. This is just a really small/simple example of what can happen and what a coach can do if they step in to address this. This is how we learn from these mistakes. It's by taking action, being proactive to go, okay, I notice that this is happening. This is not okay. Let's modify this to ensure it's meeting those athletes' demands, and and their body is maintaining that healthy balance to prevent them being sidelined. And I'm sure you can tell that this is a topic I'm so passionate about, and I know so many topics I am, because again, it's personal. It's something that did happen to me, and it's so absolutely fundamental to set the record straight to the players and athletes out there, and to the parents. It's not their fault, especially if they're doing as they've been instructed to do. And for the coaches out there, I'm not saying it's your fault either, because the education out there, if you are doing exactly what it says, there is a void here. And I know that because it's something I uncovered, that there is a significant gap in the literature when we're looking at this. So if you have the ambition to work with your athlete who's aspiring to become a professional player and ascend towards the top 10 over the course of the next 10 to 20 years, again, being mindful of that 20 years of play. And obviously if you're that 16, 17-year-old, then you're at you'll come into the end of that first 10 years of play. So you're looking at that second 10 years of play, for example. And I know it sounds huge to begin with, but we're really just tracking back, saying if you start playing at 7, 8 years of age, it's incremental. It's not a full load at 8, 9, of course not. It's incremental and progressive within that first 10 to get you to a certain peak performance and continue those cycles before you begin that next 10 and you take the 7 keys to the next level. Because by that point, they should be autonomous within your game, which is incredibly exciting, because this is new work to remold the next generation of play to be safeguarded against these injuries, which do happen on tour across the board, ATP, WTA, it does not matter. No player is, I think, spared this from happening, but they are if the work is done. And we know certain players who are privy to this, who implement the 7 keys are. So they are naturally safeguarded in this respect. But the majority of players, which is more than 90%, and this is one of the statistics in this publication. I really hope it comes out, so please give me a few thumbs up, high fives, all of the above, cheers over this way, so I can get it out hopefully in the next couple of months, because it's really exciting. So when you're looking at that 90%, it's absolutely substantial when you think, oh my goodness, that is the statistic of amount of coaches who do not know. They are not educated in this respect to allow their athletes to reach the top 10 and to maintain that level of play. Obviously, a lot of the foundations are done from in the Science of Elite Performance to, again, that What Is Your Game Missing series, and I'm Your Tennis Coaching Guru, to, again, the 7 Keys to Optimize Your Life. There's so much packed in there to allow coaches to learn from mistakes. So you're relearning in a new way. So you're reframing it. So you're modifying your coaching practices. You're upping the ante. You're taking them to the next level. So we're not saying what you know is redundant. Not at all. What you know, hopefully, is absolutely exceptional and it serves its purpose. But it's if you want to go to the next level, to have those tools to know how do you get a player and yourself, which is underscored, incredibly important, toward them. Because all of this work, it's twofold. It's not just player specific, it's coach specific. So it's about what does the player need to know or do to perform at this level? What does the coach need to know, and what do they need to share and be knowledgeable of to impart to that player to get them to that level? And so it's parallel. The coach and the player work in tandem. It's incredibly exciting. But okay, before I keep running off in that direction, I will just share a small snippet from this final chapter, which again, I'm so proud that we've come this far, and I really hope for those of you who have not been following along from the beginning that you do a rewind, so to speak, and look at, even from episode 1, those early beginnings. And it was a very rough around the edges, and I'll be honest, I was incredibly nervous those first couple of episodes and super tentative, and I hopefully you will see when you listen to that. And now I really like to think we're having a two-way discussion, that from the feedback that I've been receiving and just the interactions, it's so incredibly rewarding, and I'm so thankful for that. So please keep that coming. Okay, here we go. Learning from mistakes and coaches. If you want to follow along, we are on page 228. Coaches are just like anyone else, and by no means are perfect. Just like every other human being, they make mistakes. Like that humanized approach. The countless coaches I have worked with over the years have always had something different to offer, and although for the most part these coaches have also been tennis-specific coaches, I've always had the objective of learning something of each coach I interacted with, whether that be good or bad. And that is really important. I think every coach serves a purpose. Hopefully there's more good than bad and you're learning good things, but you still have the capacity to learn bad. And when I say bad, you might see a coaching practice that they are implementing, and you can see from an outsider that it is not having a positive impact on that player and or athlete. Or it could be a specific drill that is incredibly challenging, and or you've seen it done a different way that has had an even more rewarding outcome. So it's not to say they're wrong, it's looking at the modifications and what works best, but it's really important as well, whether it's good or bad, you call out the negligence. And if you are in a position and you see a coach using a potential drill to condition their player athlete, to really just take them aside, well, hopefully it's reasonable and they are open to feedback to say, this is what the research says. And obviously, by all means, point them to AIMA International so they can upskill as well with you. Because if we upskill together, we bring each other along for the ride. That is how we build the next generation of play, and we can remove that significant 90% who are not knowledgeable. We can work at reducing that to, 80, 70, 60, and so on, to increase that level of awareness with coaches across the globe. Okay, either way, whatever I learned from these coaches has contributed to the coach I am today. However, through my research, I was afforded the opportunity to interact over time with other coaches that were not necessarily tennis specific. These interactions commonly occurred over social media, and the amount of knowledge to be dispersed, the thoughts shared, and the coaching ideologies promoted were and have not only been vast but also insightful. That's really important, to take a leaf out of different coaches' books, so to speak. Irrespective what sport they are in, you can look at different coaching practices. Now, a lot of these can be incredibly rewarding, but on the best possible side is that all of this work is new coaching literature, which means no other sport, which means no other coaching professional has access to this. The work behind AIMA International and these resources is applicable not just to tennis but to the sporting landscape, and that excites me the most, because it's the capacity to influence the sporting fraternity across the globe. And we use tennis as a blueprint on how to develop that top 10 tennis ranking. But as I was touching on earlier, there's one side is performance specific. So we look at the sport of tennis from the technical implications. That is different. But when we're looking again at the coaching dynamic, the coaching tools to principles on how to develop the best players in the world, that crosses over to how to develop the best athletes in the world. That it does not matter if you're in tennis, if you're in basketball, if you're in cricket, if you are in baseball, if you are a swimmer, it does not matter. You're in football, you're in soccer, it does not matter. And that is where it is so incredibly rewarding. And I think that is where we're going to end it, because at the end of the day, if you want to achieve a top 10 tennis ranking, AMA International has the tools. If you want to be equipped as a coach, irrespective of what sport you are in, and you want your player, your athlete to achieve the replica of a top 10 tennis ranking in your sport of choice, the tools are there. And look, at the end of the day, that is why we're here. And if we want to learn from mistakes, we need to upskill, be mindful of that, have that level of self-awareness, which we have touched on in more recent episodes. And by using that internal feedback mechanism to have those conversations, to review our coaching practices, to implement, to re-educate, to relearn what really is behind, how we can harness those tools to develop in our athletes, our players, that top 10 tennis ranking. Thank you so much for joining us today. We got, I think, really lighthearted to begin with, and then we really took a dive deeper, especially sharing some new insights that are under wraps with this latest publication. And like I've shared, it's been a little bit tricky to obviously keep that from you guys, because it's something I've been working on every day, and talking to you guys happens quite frequently. So thank you for keeping it under wraps then with me, and I'm really looking forward to when that is released, and I will obviously keep you all in the loop. But all right, thank you so much for listening. To grab a copy of The Secrets to Optimal Performance Success, head on over to AMA International, and when that book is getting closer and closer, you will find snippets and release dates again on AMA International. For any comments or questions, head on over to AMA International or Topic Thread, the social platform set on data privacy. To interact with Beyond Top 10 Tennis, head on over to Twitter, Threads, LinkedIn or Instagram. To catch up on our weekly coaching tips, head on over to TikTok, and to catch up on our blogs, head on over to Medium or directly to AMA International and look for our blogs tabs, and you will see them all there. And as always, I will leave all the links in the episode notes. For something different, head on over to Pink Octopus Books. That's where my fictional release is. And to view this week's question and poll, be sure to visit Spotify, or for something left of field, visit Spruik for some random polls. And I'd love your feedback there. And of course, if you enjoyed today's episode, please subscribe, like, share, and all of the above would be absolutely phenomenal. And for those of you who are interested, we do have scholarships available on AMA International, as well as options to work with me exclusively if you're really serious about heading closer towards that top 10 tennis ranking. So don't be shy and come and say hi. They are limited places, and I can't stress that enough. On that note, thank you so much for listening. I am so incredibly grateful. I'm your host, Dr. Ashley Morgan Berge, and this is Beyond Top 10 Tennis, and I'll see you next time.